A woman buried alive for a sin she didn't commit. Nora Ellingwood, 27, lies trapped in the cracked earth of Clear Hollow, her breath fading under a merciless 1878 sky. Branded barren, betrayed by her husband's lies, she believes this is her end. But a stranger's hands, scarred by loss, will unearth her, and a new life awaits where love defies shame. Will Nora rise to claim it? Her story of resilience and redemption will grip your heart. Don't miss how it unfolds. Subscribe now, share where you're listening from, and dive into this tale. Can a buried soul find home again? Stay tuned to find out. The drought of 1878 had clawed Clear Hollow dry, splitting the earth like old leather under a butcher's knife. Dust hung in the air, thick as grief, as Nora Ellingwood, 27, was dragged from her husband's sagging porch. Her bare feet scraped ruts in the dirt, but no one met her eyes. Not the preacher with his Bible clutched like a shield, not the women clutching shawls, not even the boy who'd once brought her wildflowers. The town's silence was louder than any curse. They'd branded her barren, a blight on her husband Raymond's name, and now they'd bury her for it, out where the coyotes wailed and the stars turned cold. Her crime wasn't just childlessness. The truth lay bruised and buried deeper. Raymond, red-eyed with whiskey, had kicked her down the stairs one frost-bitten night, snuffing out the child she'd carried 3 months. Blood had pooled beneath her, warm and final. But when she'd whispered the loss, he'd spat, "You failed me." The town swallowed his lie whole. The preacher, hungry for control, wove it into a sermon. Nora was a curse, a dry well poisoning Clear Hollow's future. No one questioned it. Fear spread faster than truth in a place like this. They hauled her to a field where the ground cracked like a broken promise. Her wrists burned from the rope as they forced her into a shallow pit. Men with calloused hands, farmers, blacksmiths, fathers, shoveled dirt over her legs, her hips, her chest, until only her shoulders and head remained free. The earth pressed like a lover gone cruel, stealing her breath. "One night," the preacher intoned, voice flat as slate, "survive, and you're free to leave." Free, Nora thought, as if Clear Hollow ever let a woman go. No wolves would come, they said. No rain, just the lesson of shame, carved into her skin by sand and silence. The crowd drifted away, boots scuffing the earth, leaving her alone with the wind. It hissed over her brow, teasing grit into her lashes, uncaring as the god they claimed to serve. Her lips cracked, tongue swollen against her teeth. She tried to hum, a hymn her mother sang when the crops failed, but the notes died in her throat. Above, vultures circled, black specks against a sky bruised purple. Nora's mind drifted to the child she'd lost, a life no one mourned but her. She'd named it in secret. Hope, a foolish word now choking on dust. Raymond hadn't come, not to bury her, not to watch. He'd stayed in his saloon, drowning the truth in rye. She pictured his hands, rough and unyielding, and the lie he'd fed the town. She's hollow, always was. Hollow. The word echoed in her ribs, heavier than the dirt pinning her. She'd believed it once, when the midwife's pitying eyes confirmed no child would come again. Now, buried to her neck, she wondered if they were right. Maybe she was nothing, a shadow the world wanted gone. The sun sank, dragging the heat with it. Cold seeped into her bones, sharp as betrayal. Her breaths grew shallow, each one a fight against the earth's grip. Stars blinked awake, indifferent. A coyote's cry sliced the dark, answered by another, closer. Nora's pulse stuttered. She whispered her own name, Nora Ellingwood, to prove she still existed. Once, she'd been a girl who braided daisies into her hair, a wife who sewed curtains with careful stitches. Now, she was a grave half-finished, a warning to women who failed. Her eyes grew heavy, lids gritty with sand. The world blurred at the edges, pulling her toward a sleep she might not wake from. She thought of her mother's hands, kneading dough in a kitchen long gone, of the cradle she'd built for a child that never breathed, of Raymond's fist and the blood that followed. Each memory was a stone, sinking her deeper. This was her end, she thought, not with a scream, but a sigh, swallowed by the desert's vast, uncaring mouth. Yet, as the moon climbed high, a faint tremor stirred the ground. Not wind, not beast, but the soft tread of moccasins on sand. A shadow loomed, tall and silent against the silver dark. Nora's heart kicked, a spark in the ashes. Someone had come, not to mourn, not to mock, but to see her. And in Clear Hollow, where silence was law, that alone was a rebellion. That shadow in the moonlight wasn't death, but it carried its weight. Caytan Lone Mesa, an Apache widower carved lean by grief, stepped closer, his moccasins silent on the desert's cracked skin. His long coat swayed like sagebrush in the wind, a rifle slung across his back, catching the moon's pale gleam. Nora Ellingwood's breath hitched, a dry rasp in her throat, as his eyes, storm-dark and unreadable, met hers. No pity there, no judgment, just the steady gaze of a man who'd buried his own and kept walking. Caytan knelt, his hands testing the earth around her neck, fingers calloused but sure, like they knew the difference between grave and rescue. He didn't speak, didn't ask why Clear Hollow had entombed her. The wind howled, spitting grit, but he worked against it, digging with a bone-handled knife and bare hands. Each scrape of dirt loosened the desert's grip, sending a shiver through Nora's pinned frame. Her chest ached, ribs screaming for air the earth had stolen. She tried to speak, to ask who he was, but her tongue betrayed her, swollen and useless. A single tear cut a track through the dust on her cheek. He paused only once, glancing at the horizon where coyotes yipped, their calls sharp as broken glass. Satisfied no one followed, he dug faster, freeing her shoulders, then her arms. When the last clod fell away, Nora gasped, a sound like a bellow stoked to life. Caytan slipped an arm under her, lifting her from the pit as if she weighed no more than a willow branch. Her legs, numb and bloodless, buckled, but he held firm, his warmth a shock against her chilled skin. From his belt, he unstrapped a leather flask, tilting water to her lips, cold, clean, tasting of stone and salvation. She drank in gulps, choking, her hands trembling as they grazed his. He draped a deer-hide blanket over her shoulders, its edges worn but soft, etched with faded symbols she couldn't read. Without a word, he led her to his horse, a black mare with eyes like polished obsidian. Nora clung to the saddle as he mounted behind her, one arm steadying her waist. Not possessive, but certain, like a man guiding a boat through a storm. The mare moved sure-footed over the uneven ground, climbing toward Mesa Ridge, where shadows of pines stood like sentinels. The wind, cruel before, now felt alive, brushing her matted hair, whispering of a world that hadn't yet given up on her. The trail wound higher, the air thinning, sharp with the scent of creosote and cedar. Nora's head lolled, exhaustion pulling her under, but Caytan's grip kept her anchored. She caught glimpses of him in the moonlight, high cheekbones, a jaw set like flint, hair braided tight against the nape of his neck. His silence wasn't empty. It carried the weight of a man who'd learned words could cost more than they gave. She wondered what had carved him this way, what ghosts rode with him through the dark. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled between two stone outcrops, its pine walls weathered to match the ridge. Smoke curled from a chimney, faint as a prayer. Caton dismounted, lifting Nora down with the same care he'd used to free her. Her knees buckled again, but she forced herself to stand, clutching the blanket. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the smell of burning sage and boiled corn. 4 children stirred in the dim light. A boy, maybe 10, mute and watchful. A girl, 3, clutching a rag doll. And 2 infants, swaddled tight in a cradle by the hearth. Their eyes, wide and wary, locked on Nora. A stranger dusted in shame. Caton set her near the fire, its glow painting his face in flickers of gold. He handed her a tin cup of broth, steaming and laced with herbs, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Rest," he said, his voice low, like the rumble of a distant storm. "Winds don't judge here." The words landed soft, but heavy, a promise or a truth she couldn't yet grasp. The children stared, the boy's hand signing something to the girl, who shrank behind him. Nora sipped the broth, its heat thawing her core, and felt the weight of their gaze, not cruel, but searching, like they wondered if she'd break or stay. She looked at Caton, now tending the infants, his movements precise, yet gentle, a man who'd learned to be both father and mother. The cabin's walls, rough-hewn and patched, spoke of survival, not comfort. A carved cradle rocked faintly. A woven shawl hung on a peg, remnants of a woman gone, but not forgotten. Nora's throat tightened. She was no mother, no wife, yet here she was, alive in a place where life clung stubbornly as cactus. The fire cracked, and she wondered if this was refuge, or just another kind of grave, one warmer, but no less uncertain. The fire's crackle was a fragile promise, but Nora Ellingwood held it close, her hand still trembling around the tin cup. Dawn crept through the cabin's slats, painting the pine walls in streaks of gold, and with it came the weight of a new day, one she hadn't expected to see. The air carried the tang of sage and the faint wail of an infant, stirring her from the haze of survival. Caton's children, 4 small lives tethered to this rugged refuge, watched her from their corners, their eyes like desert pools, deep, guarded, waiting for her to prove she belonged. Nora set the cup down, her fingers stiff from the cold that lingered in her bones. The boy, Thomas, sat cross-legged by the hearth, carving a stick with a blunt knife, his hands moving in silence that spoke louder than words. Lena, the 3-year-old, clutched her doll, peeking from behind a crate, her braid frayed like the end of a rope. The twins, barely a month old, fussed in their cradle, their cries sharp as thorns. Caton was gone, his boots missing from the door, likely hunting or checking traps before the sun burned the ridge dry. Nora was alone with them, a stranger tasked with more than she knew how to carry. She rose, knees creaking, and approached the cradle. The smaller twin, a girl with skin like new leather, squirmed, her face pinched with hunger. Nora's hands hesitated. Her own womb had betrayed her, left her hollow, or so Clear Hollow claimed. But the child's cry cut through doubt, demanding now, not memory. She lifted the infant, her arms clumsy but steadying, and found a bottle of goat's milk by the stove. The warmth of the child against her chest was a shock, like rain on parched earth. She hummed, a tuneless sound from her mother's kitchen, and the twin quieted, lips working the bottle with fierce trust. The day unfolded in small, relentless tasks. Nora boiled water, scrubbed cloths stiff with spit-up, and fed the children corn mush laced with dried berries. Tomas signed to her, quick flicks of his fingers she couldn't read, but his nod when she handed him a bowl felt like approval. Lena trailed her, silent but close, her tiny hand brushing Nora's skirt. The cabin, rough and worn, began to feel less like a cage, its smells Wood smoke, herbs, the faint sourness of milk wove into her skin, grounding her in a rhythm she hadn't known she craved. Outside, the ridge was a world of stone and sky, the pines whispering secrets the wind couldn't keep. Nora carried Lena to gather kindling, the girl's weight a quiet anchor. As they stacked twigs, Lena's hand slipped into hers, small and warm, crossing a divide Nora hadn't dared to bridge. She froze, the memory of her lost child, a life she'd named Hope, stinging sharp. But Lena's grip tightened, and Nora exhaled, letting the pain settle like dust. That evening, Caton returned, a rabbit slung over his shoulder, his face unreadable as ever. He nodded at the fire, at the children fed and calm, and something shifted in his eyes. Not warmth, but respect, hard-earned as flint. After the children slept, he led her to a clearing beyond the cabin, where a low mound lay beneath a lone pine, marked by a smooth stone. "My wife," he said, voice like gravel underfoot. "She rests here." Nora stood silent, the weight of his loss a mirror to her own. The Apache way kept him distant, his grief a land she couldn't cross, but she felt its edges in the air between them. As they walked back, Nora's body betrayed her, a wave of nausea, a heaviness in her chest. She steadied herself against a rock, breath shallow. The signs were unmistakable. She was pregnant, a miracle where none should be. Fear coiled tight. Could a child survive in her, in this world that buried women for less? But with it came a spark, fierce and stubborn, like the life she'd clawed back from the desert. This story's only beginning, and if it's gripping you like it is me, hit that subscribe button. Join us to see where Nora's path leads. Share it with someone who loves a tale of grit and heart. It's the kind of story that grows when you pass it on. Back in the cabin, Nora lay awake, the twins' soft breaths mingling with the wind's low moan. She touched her stomach, a secret she couldn't yet voice, and felt the ridge's pulse beneath her, a call to root herself, not in shame, but in the stubborn act of living. The earth had tried to claim her, but she was here, and something new was growing. The pulse of the ridge, steady as a drum, lingered in Nora Ellingwood's veins as she woke to a sky bruised with dusk. Her secret, the child growing within her, hummed like a hidden spring, both fragile and fierce. The cabin's air was thick with the scent of pine and boiled roots, but a sharper edge cut through, the distant crack of hooves on stone. Trouble was coming, and in Clear Hollow, trouble always carried fire. Nora stood at the cabin's threshold, Lena tugging at her skirt, the twins asleep in their cradle. Thomas, the mute boy, sharpened a stick by the hearth, his eyes flicking to the door. Caton was out, scouting the ridge's far trails, leaving the cabin unguarded. The hoofbeats grew louder, joined by the low growl of men's voices. Nora's stomach tightened, not for herself, but for the children, for the life stirring inside her. She scooped Lena up, her small body warm against her hip, and peered through the window's warped glass. Shadows moved in the twilight. 3 men, their silhouettes jagged with intent. The leader dismounted, his coat dusted with red earth. Raymond, her husband, his face harder than she remembered, eyes glinting with the same cruelty that had broken her once. 2 others flanked him, an old hunter, grizzled and hawk-eyed, and a drunkard from the saloon, swaying but clutching a knife. They weren't here for justice. Raymond's lie, that Nora was bewitched by Apache spirits, had spread like sagebrush fire, and now he'd come to erase her before the truth could burn him. "Lena," Nora whispered, setting the girl down. "Hide with Thomas." The boy grabbed his sister's hand, pulling her behind a stack of furs. Nora's hand found a poker by the fire, its iron cold and heavy. She stepped outside, the wind snapping her skirt, and faced the men across the clearing. Raymond froze, his torch casting shadows that danced like ghosts. "You're no spirit," he spat, but his voice cracked, betraying fear. "You should have stayed buried." "I'm done staying down," Nora said, her voice steady as the ridge itself. The hunter raised a rifle, but the drunkard hesitated, his blade catching the torchlight. "She's with that Apache," he muttered. "Stole his kids, they say." Nora's grip tightened on the poker. "I stole nothing. I'm keeping them alive." The argument was cut short by a scream. Lena's, shrill and piercing from the brush beyond the cabin. Nora's heart lurched. The men had a fourth, unseen, who'd circled behind. She bolted toward the sound, ignoring Raymond's shout. The poker swung in her hand, a reflex born of rage. In the dim light, she saw Lena tied to a Joshua tree, her wrists bound, a gag muffling her cries. A wiry man stood guard, his back to Nora. She didn't think. She swung, the poker cracking against his skull. He crumpled, and she tore the ropes free, pulling Lena into her arms. Caton emerged from the shadows, silent as a cougar, his knife glinting. He'd tracked the men from the ridge's edge. Without a word, he lunged at the hunter, disarming him with a single twist. Raymond charged, but Nora threw a handful of sand into his eyes. His own trick turned against him. He howled, staggering, as Caton pinned the drunkard to the ground. The fight was over in moments, the air thick with dust and the stink of fear. "You paid them," Nora said, facing Raymond, Lena clinging to her side, "to hide what you did." The hunter, nursing a bloodied arm, spat the truth. "He said you'd ruin him, paid us to make you gone." Raymond's face twisted, but he said nothing, his torch flickering in the dirt. The drunkard, trembling, dropped his knife. Caton stood tall, his voice low as thunder. "Take your shame and go." Raymond stumbled back, eyes wild, then fled into the desert's black maw, the others trailing like broken dogs. Nora held Lena close, her pulse racing, the child in her womb a quiet weight. Caton cut Lena's gag free, his hand steady but his eyes burning. "They'll talk," he said, nodding toward the ridge. "Clear Hollow won't forget." "Let them talk," Nora replied, her voice carved from stone. She carried Lena back to the cabin, the girl's sobs softening. The twins stirred, unharmed, and Thomas emerged, signing fiercely, his face alight with relief. The fire still burned, its glow a defiance against the night. Nora's hand rested on her stomach, the spark within her stronger now, unburied by fear or flame. The desert had tried to claim her, but she stood, rooted, ready for whatever came next. The desert's silence reclaimed the ridge, swallowing the echo of fleeing boots. But Nora Ellingwood stood unbroken, her hand still warm from Lena's grip. The firelight flickered across the cabin's walls, a beacon against the night's hunger. She knelt by the twins' cradle, their soft breaths a rhythm stronger than fear, and felt the child within her to stir, a quiet vow to endure. Dawn was coming, and with it, a chance to carve a life from the ashes Clear Hollow had left behind. Winter's first snow-dusted mesa ridge, light as ash, but sharp with promise. Nora woke to a world softened at the edges, the cabin's pine walls creaking under frost. Caton was up before light, his shadow moving outside, splitting wood with steady swings. The children stirred, Thomas whittling by the hearth, Lena stacking pebbles into wobbly towers, the twins gurgling in their swaddle. Nora's body ached, the weight of her pregnancy a constant pull, but she moved with purpose, boiling pine needles for tonic and stirring corn mush over the fire. The cabin smelled of smoke and survival, a scent that rooted her deeper each day. She stepped onto the porch, breath clouding in the chill, and watched the ridge unfold under a sky like polished steel. The snow melted in patches, revealing earth that refused to stay buried. Lena toddled out, pressing a cold hand to Nora's skirt, and pointed at a sparrow darting through the pines. "Bird," she whispered, her first word to Nora, sharp and clear as a bell. Nora's throat tightened, not with grief, but with something fiercer. Belonging, hard-won and unyielding. She lifted Lena, kissing her brow, and felt the ridge's pulse match her own. Caton returned, his coat dusted white, a brace of quail slung over his shoulder. His eyes lingered on Nora, not soft, but steady, like a man reading tracks in the sand. He set a carved cradleboard by the door, its cedar surface etched with a winding river. The place he'd found her. "For the twins," he said, voice low as the wind. "Or another." Nora's hand brushed her stomach, the unspoken truth heavy between them. She nodded, unable to speak, the cradleboard a bridge across their silences. Days folded into weeks, the snow deepening, then retreating as spring's green claws pierced the earth. Nora planted sage along the slope, her fingers raw but sure, while Thomas taught her signs for water and fire. Lena called her Ma, the word slipping out mid-laugh, and the twins reached for her with chubby fists. The child within her grew, a secret no longer hidden, its kicks a rhythm of defiance. Caton watched, never pressing, but his glances carried weight. A man who saw her not as broken, but whole. One afternoon, dust rose on the trail below, a lone rider climbing the ridge. Nora, hanging linens, froze as the figure dismounted. Raymond, older now, his face lined with guilt, hat clutched like a plea. "Nora," he said, voice brittle as dry twigs. "I came to make it right." She stood tall, the wind tugging her braid, and saw not her husband, but a man diminished by his own lies. "You thought I was broken," she said, each word a stone. "But I'm a mother now, to 4 who chose me and 1 coming." Raymond's eyes flickered to her swollen belly, then to Caton, who'd appeared, silent by the shed. "I was wrong," Raymond muttered. "The preacher, the town, they fed me lies, and I ate 'em." Nora stepped closer, her shadow long across the dirt. "You don't get to undo what you broke. Go and take your shame with you." He nodded, defeated, and rode away, the dust swallowing him like the desert had always meant to. That night, the cabin glowed under a sky thick with stars. Nora sat by the fire, Lena curled in her lap, the twins asleep, Thomas signing a story about a fox. Caton joined her, his hand brushing hers, not claiming, but present. She sang a lullaby, her mother's old tune, and the children's breaths wove into it, a chorus of life. The ridge stood guard, its pines whispering of endurance. Nora's hand rested on her belly, the child's kick a spark against the dark. Clear Hollow had buried her, but she'd risen, not just to survive, but to claim a home where love grew stubborn as cactus, unyielding as stone. Nora's journey from a desert grave to a home carved by love leaves us with a truth. Resilience can bloom where shame tried to bury us. What did her story stir in you? Drop your thoughts below. Your voice adds to this tale's fire. I'm grateful for every one of you joining me in Clear Hollow's dust and hope. It's been a ride, and I can't wait to share another story with you soon. Until then, keep carrying your own spark, no matter what the world tries to bury. See you at the next campfire.